In studying the language and literature under the Mughals, today we shall see Marathi, Bengali and then ORIYA. In these three, the Marathi is slightly different from the Mughals, as well as it is slightly different from certain earlier languages which we have studied. In Marathi, during this period, the principal feature was that through religion, the Marathi writers and the poets were trying to rejuvenate the Marathi culture, the Marathi life, inspire people to fight. This was because of the coming of the Mughals into the Deccan, and a lifelong struggle started during this period. Now in this struggle, the Marathi writers and the poets, they had used the various emblems from the Puranic gods and goddesses, from the Puranic episodes, and at the same time they used the bhakti cult in that. The earliest writer of this period was Janardhan Swami, who died in 1575. Janardhan Swami was a governor of a fort, and he was a very good administrator as well. Now he taught also Swami Eknath. He first taught that not only the spiritual world has to be maintained, but the physical world, the world in which one is living, that has to be secured, that has to be maintained as well. After Janardhan Swami, we have Swami Eknath, who was very popular. But Swami Eknath was far more scholastic in nature. He made translation of the Bhagavad, but at the same time, he made an excellent commentary of a 11th century text, a very scholarly work that was done by him. After Swami Eknath, then came the two others, Daspant and Vishnudas Nam. Among these, Vishnudas Nam was the first one who translated the Mahabharata into the Marathi language, the first one in that. But in all these, the principal feature was the struggle between the God, good, and the devil and bad. The literary movement that was started by them spread far and wide quite rapidly, in which different castes, even different creeds of people had come in. Significantly, Thomas Stephen, an Englishman of the period, he wrote Krishna Puran purely in Marathi, once again giving the life of the Christ, but totally in Marathi and not a translation of anything. It was his own creation. After Thomas Stephen, we have Saint Ramdas, Swami Ramdas, who was very popular. He wrote many poems, and he was the one who tried to show the story on the basis of Ram holding the bow. This is a kind of a posture that Ramdas had taken, and Ramdas continued in this fashion. The other one was Tukaram, who was also called a saint. Tukaram was a small trader, but in the famine that developed, he lost his trade, and the famine took away his first wife and his firstborn. So he left this world and joined the spiritual world in the sense that he began to meditate and write only on religion. But at the same time, he did not forget the struggle between Ram and Ravan, between the good and the evil. And while Ramdas was trying to create an ideal state, Tukaram was more interested in the continuation of the struggle. So in the Marathi literature, we have a particular feature which was absent in other regional languages and literature. After them came Raghunath and Sridhar, who wrote on the Puranic episodes. Then came the ballads. The ballads, which are called Padvat, then were very popular, and most of these ballads were on historical themes. The interesting thing is that these are not on the Puranic themes, but on the contemporary events which are unfolding before them. For example, one of the poets wrote on Shivaji and Shivaji's encounter with Afzal Khan. Another poet who was contemporary to Shivaji wrote on Nal Damayanti, but never forgetting Shivaji as such. Another poet wrote on Tanaji, that is the lieutenant of Shivaji, Tanaji's conquest of the fort of Sinhagad. So therefore, the emphasis was gradually shifting, changing in a sense, to the contemporary world, the world in which they were living, and not on the Puranic episodes, although those episodes were not really gone, or those episodes did not really vanish. After the Marathi, we come to the Bengali literature, which was fairly strong at the time, fairly flourishing in the Mughal period. Bengali literature can broadly be divided in two main types. One is the Vaishnava literature, influenced by the Neo-Vaishnavism of Chaitanya of Navadvip, and the other was the Mangal literature. Mangal means well-being. Mangal literature based on the local gods and goddesses. Now, Vaishnava literature first started by Vrindavan Das, who wrote before 1540. He was a classmate of Chaitanya, and although he tried to show that Chaitanya was a very superior man, but he was not a superman. There were various worldly things there. And at the same time, Vrindavan Das and other Vaishnavas or Mangal poems, they tried to show the social and economic condition of the people, particularly of the lower classes. Now, Vrindavan Das was one of the foremost. The other one at the end almost was Krishnadas Kaviraj. Krishnadas Kaviraj was the one who quoted his authority for his own statements, a rather rare feature in medieval world. At the same time, one could see that there were differences between Vrindavan Das and Krishnadas Kaviraj. For example, in the conflict between Kazi and Chaitanya, Kazi of Navadvip and Chaitanya, Vrindavan Das had shown that Chaitanya's followers had done some violence, while Krishnadas Kaviraj did not show this kind of violence. So there is a basic difference of approach between them. One wrote at the time when Mughal Empire was in trouble, and the other wrote when the Mughal Empire was thoroughly established. And the difference could be seen very easily in their writings. There are certain other writers. The best of them was Lochan Das. Lochan Das, then we have Jayananda, Chaitanya Mangal, and then we have certain other writers, Churamani Das, for example, Gauranga Vijay, all belonging to the 16th century. Among these, Lochan Das was slightly different because he tried to include the folk gods and goddesses in it, or in other words, in his writings, the influence of the Mangal poems could be seen. Although Mangal poems did not really come up by that time. The Vaishnava poets, they however had a very violent attitude towards the Muslim Nawabs, as well as in the earlier days, like the days of Vrindavan Das, they were against the Brahmins as well. But when we come to the Padavali, the Vaishnava Padavali, the lyrical poems, we don't see that kind of violent attitude. It's far more lyrical in nature. The more emphasis is given on the lyrics, which started around the end of the 16th century. But by early 17th century, the main spark, the main boost was gone. It became quite mechanical and therefore lost its primary value as such. Mangal poems were of different nature. These are the poems which are generally sung in some assemblies by some people and on the local gods and goddesses. For example, there was the Manasa Mangal, the snake goddess. There was the Dharma Mangal of the Dharma Thakur. There was the Shivayan, the Shiva. There's the Chandi Mangal of Chandi, a form of Durga. There's the Kalika Mangal of Kali. There was the Shitala Mangal of Shitala goddess, the goddess of smallpox. There were certain other types, like the one on the tiger goddess, the Dakshin Rai. But the Dakshin Rai poems are not really considered as Mangal poems. Similarly, there are the poems of the Ghazis, particularly done by the sailors, Pir Badar. But these are not, in that sense, really the Mangal poems. The Mangal poems actually started early. From the end of the 15th century, we have the Mangal poems, first one by Vijay Gupta, and then by Vipradas Piplai, both belonging at the end of the 15th century. The feature is that at least in Vipradas Piplai, there was an excellent description of Sadgam or Saptagram, while in Vijay Gupta, he has referred to the conflict between the shepherds and the Muslim Qazi, but at the same time he has praised the Sultan very much. That is, it was not against all the Muslims as such, It was against only the Muslim Qazis. Qazi, as you would remember, was the villain of the Bengali literature. Now, Mansa Mangal continued in the 16th century as well. There were certain other writers. Ketokidas Khemanand was one of those. And it continued to write in the same vein. The story remains the same. There is not much of change. The story of Behula, for example, that has remained the principal story of the times. From Mansa Mangal, if we go to Chandi Mangal, goddess Chandi being one of the forms of Durga, we see the greatest exponent, Mukundaram Chakravarti, at the end of the 16th century. Now, Mukundaram Chakravarti's Chandi Mangal, he used to give himself a title called Kobi Kankan, and therefore his book was called Kobi Kankan Chandi. Now, this Chandi Mangal story is more or less the same. The story as has been made by earlier writers like Dijo Madhav. The story remains the same. The merchant, Dhanapati merchant, goes to the sea for trading. He is a favorite of the goddess and he suffers, and then the goddess brings him out of the suffering. Now, in Chandi Mangal, particularly of Mukundaram, there are other dimensions for which Mukundaram has become quite famous. The dimension is that Mukundaram has shown on the one hand the desertion of villages by the imposition of the Zapti system of Akbar during the time of Man Singh. In a village of Bardwan, actually, he was one of those who left his ancestral village because of that. And on the other hand, he was trying to show that there was new urbanization, new towns were being planned, set up. There was the deforestation, the forests were cut down, and people, ordinary people becoming very, very powerful and king. In Mukundaram's writing, there is no venom against the Muslims. He has also described the professions of the Muslims very carefully. And his description remains perhaps the best one, although Bipradas also had done it earlier, but Mukundaram's is the best one on the subject. In Bengali literature, there is one feature that is sometimes present in other regional languages, that there were Muslim writers writing in Bengali. Shahid Khan, who wrote in Bengali, Muhammad Khan, who wrote in Bengali, but the best one was Sayyid Sultan in the early 18th century, who wrote on Rasul Vijay Kabbo. Now, the feature of the Rasul Vijay Kabbo is that here Sayyid Sultan had introduced the Hindu gods and goddesses, even certain yogic practices. While he was writing on the prophets, he was writing also on the Hindu doctrines and Hindu gods and Hindu goddesses as well. So one could see a kind of an integration at a very high level, abstract level, in this particular poem. Then we have the ORIYA poems. ORIYA poems started as a translation of Sanskrit, particularly of religious texts, Bhagavat, even Joydev's Geet Govinda, lyrically in ORIYA. And there were earlier several writers like Bhim, Shishu Ishwar Das, etc. But gradually one could see that there were two changes in it. The first change was that novels in poetry, in verse that is, began to be introduced into ORIYA. And these novels are mostly secular in character, the love story of two persons in a countryside, of a rural area. And Ramchandra Pattanayak was the one who first introduced this kind of poems in ORIYA. The second feature of the ORIYA piece, ORIYA literature, was that a gradual change was coming slightly from religious to the secular level. Novel was one step in that direction, but it continued in that form for fairly long time. So the literature of both Marathi, Bengali and ORIYA had its changes, its developments within themselves during this particular period.